The first violation notice arrived while I was still unpacking boxes, and I knew right then I had made a terrible mistake moving into Silver Creek Owners Association. I am a home warranty claims rep, which means I spend 40 hours a week reading fine print and hunting for loopholes. So when I saw the boilerplate language threatening a $50 fine for wet boot trays visible from the street, I should have recognized the red flags. But I needed affordable housing in Knoxville, Tennessee, close to my office, and this townhome complex with shared walls and non-stop complaints was all I could afford after my divorce cleaned me out. The boot trays were sitting 2 feet inside my front door vestibule, barely visible unless you walked right up to my stoop and craned your neck, and the notice did not cite any actual rule number. It just said compliance required within 48 hours or fees would accrue. I crumpled it up and tossed it in recycling, figuring someone had the wrong address. 2 days later, Danielle Davis was standing on my front step at 7 in the morning, breath fogging in the December cold, wearing a royal blue-belted wool coat and a cream-knit beanie, clipboard in one gloved hand. She introduced herself as Janet, her preferred name, and said she was the pool and amenities chair for the HOA, which apparently gave her authority over everything from mailbox plantings to where I kept my shoes. She had black shoulder-length straight hair and the kind of tight smile that never reached her eyes. She said the boot trays were still there, clearly visible from the common area sidewalk, and I was now in violation. I pointed out that my front door faced my own tiny private patio, not the street, and asked her to show me the rule. She tapped her clipboard and said, "You are out of compliance, and you know it." Then she turned and walked back down the path, boots crunching on the light dusting of snow that had fallen overnight, leaving a stack of door hangers with snow-soaked edges wedged under my door knocker. I called the management company that afternoon and got a bored receptionist who put me on hold for 11 minutes, then told me Janet was correct. Any items visible from common areas were subject to architectural review, and I should move the trays inside a closet. I asked where that was written in the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, and she said she would email me a copy. The email never came. Instead, I got another notice 2 days later, this time with a photograph paperclipped to it, showing my boot trays from an angle that required standing on the shared walkway and zooming in with a phone camera. The notice said I had 24 hours to comply, or the HOA would begin assessing daily fines of $25. I moved the trays into my coat closet and sent a certified letter to the management company demanding a copy of the governing documents and a breakdown of what rules I had actually violated. That was my first mistake, because it put me on Janet's radar as someone who pushed back. My second mistake was not realizing how much power she had as pool and amenities chair. In a neighborhood like Silver Creek, where half the townhomes were rentals and most owners just wanted to be left alone, anyone willing to spend hours combing through bylaws and volunteering for committees could effectively run the place. Janet had been on the board for 6 years. She controlled access to the tiny clubhouse, the seasonal pool, and the guest parking passes. She had a key to the mailroom in the storage shed. And she had a reputation, which I learned about in the neighborhood group chat when I made the mistake of posting a polite question about the boot tray rule. 3 neighbors messaged me privately within an hour. One said Janet had threatened to revoke her pool access because her kids were too loud during adult swim hours. Another said Janet had reported him for parking his work truck in his own driveway overnight, claiming it was a commercial vehicle even though it was just a pickup with his company name on the door. The third neighbor, a paralegal named Marcus who lived 4 units down, said Janet had tried to fine him for putting up a bird feeder without architectural approval, and he had to hire a lawyer to get the board to back down. Marcus told me to document everything, keep copies of every notice, and never talk to Janet without a witness. He said the management company was worse than useless because they got a cut of every fine collected, so they had no incentive to rein her in. He also said the board had a habit of losing documents unless you paid processing fees that were not listed anywhere in the official rules. That detail stuck with me because I had just requested a copy of the CC&Rs and nobody had responded. The snow started falling hard the week before Christmas, and Knoxville is not equipped for winter weather. The plows did not come through Silver Creek for 2 days, and when they finally did, they pushed all the snow into berms at the end of every driveway, trapping cars until owners could shovel themselves out. I spent an hour clearing my driveway on a Saturday morning, piling the snow on the grass strip between the sidewalk and the street. which was the only place it could go. By Sunday, every driveway on my street looked the same. White mounds flanking the asphalt, icicles hanging from mailbox posts. I did not think anything of it until Monday morning when I found another stack of door hangers with snow-soaked edges shoved under my door knocker. This time the notice said I was in violation for altering common property by piling snow on the landscaped berm, and I needed to redistribute the snow within 12 hours or face a $100 fine. I called Marcus. He came over with his phone already recording and looked at the notice, then looked at my snow pile, then looked at every other driveway on the block. He said this was classic selective enforcement, and if Janet tried to fine me, she would have to fine everyone, which she would not do because it would trigger a revolt. He told me to take photos of every driveway, time-stamped, and to reply to the notice in writing stating that I had cleared snow in the same manner as all other residents, and requested clarification on what alternative method was acceptable given that the street was not plowed and there was nowhere else to put the snow. He also told me to mention that I was still waiting for the CC&Rs I had requested 3 weeks earlier. He said that last part was important, because if they were withholding documents, it showed bad faith. I sent the email that night. The response came in less than an hour, and it was not from the management company. It was from Janet, sent from her personal email, CCing the entire board. She said I was creating a hostile environment, that my attitude was unacceptable, and that I was the only problem on this street. She said my refusal to follow simple instructions was putting the neighborhood at risk, and if I did not comply immediately, she would have no choice but to escalate. The email did not say what escalate meant, but the subject line was formal notice of non-compliance, and it had an attachment labeled final warning. I opened the attachment and saw a scanned image of a lien notice template, blank but clearly meant as a threat. That was when I gave her a small thank you, because she just handed me leverage. I forwarded the email to Marcus, and he called me 10 minutes later laughing. He said Janet had just put her harassment in writing and CC'd witnesses, and if she tried to file a lien, he would help me fight it for free. He also said I should file a formal records request under Tennessee law, because HOAs are required to provide governing documents to owners within a reasonable time, and if they were hiding them unless I paid bogus fees, that was a violation I could report to the state. He drafted the records request for me that night, and I sent it certified mail the next morning. I also printed out Janet's email and put it in a folder with every notice I had received, every photo I had taken, and a timeline of every interaction. The furnace in my townhome started making a grinding noise 2 days before Christmas. I called my home warranty company, which is ironic considering that is where I work, and they sent a tech who said the blower motor was shot and needed replacement. He said he could come back the day after Christmas between 10 and noon, but if I missed the window, he would have to reschedule for the following week, and in the meantime, I should not run the heat. The overnight low was supposed to drop to 15 degrees. I could not afford to miss that appointment, because my car was essential for my commute, and if the pipes froze, I would be dealing with thousands in damage the warranty would not cover. I confirmed the appointment and set 3 alarms. On Christmas Eve, Janet posted in the neighborhood group chat. The post said there had been a slip-and-fall incident near the clubhouse, and all residents were reminded that they were responsible for keeping their walkways clear of ice and snow. She said the HOA took safety very seriously, and anyone found negligent could be held liable. She did not say who had slipped or when, and nobody else in the chat seemed to know what she was talking about. I messaged Marcus and asked if he had heard anything. He said no, and he suspected Janet was manufacturing a crisis to justify a new round of violations. He told me to check my walkway and take photos showing it was clear, just in case. I went outside with my phone and photographed my front path, my driveway, and the shared sidewalk in front of my unit. Everything was clear. The snow had melted in the sun earlier that day and refrozen into a thin glaze, but I had put down ice melt that morning and the concrete was dry. I uploaded the photos to a cloud folder with the date and timestamp and went back inside. An hour later, Janet posted again. This time she tagged me by name and said she had received reports that my walkway was hazardous and I needed to address it immediately. I replied in the chat with the timestamped photos and said my walkway was clear as of 4 p.m. and I had used ice melt. She did not respond, but 3 other people jumped in and said their walkways were also clear and asked what the actual problem was. The thread went quiet. Christmas Day was quiet. I spent it alone, ate leftover Chinese food, and watched old movies. I kept checking my email for a response to the records request, but nothing came. The next morning I woke up at 8, double-checked that the furnace tech was still scheduled, and made coffee. At 9:30, I looked out my front window and saw 3 bright orange traffic cones arranged across the end of my driveway, blocking my car in. Each cone was planted deep in the snowbank, and there was a notice zip-tied to the center cone. I pulled on my boots and coat and went outside. The notice said my vehicle was parked in violation of guest parking restrictions, and I had until noon to move it, or it would be towed at owner expense. I do not have assigned parking. None of us do. We all park in our own driveways, and the guest spaces are in a separate lot near the clubhouse. I took a photo of the cones, the notice, and my car, which was clearly in my own driveway, not a guest space. Then I called Marcus. He did not answer, so I left a message and started pulling the cones out of the snow. They were heavy and half frozen into the ice, and by the time I got the last one free, my hands were numb even through my gloves. I dragged all 3 cones onto the grass and took another photo showing my driveway clear. It was 9:50 a.m. The furnace tech was supposed to arrive in an hour, and I needed to be home when he came or I would lose the appointment. I went back inside and tried Marcus again. This time he picked up. I explained what had happened, and he swore under his breath and said he would be right over. He arrived 10 minutes later with his phone recording and walked the whole scene, narrating for the camera. He filmed the cones on my grass, the notice, my driveway, and the clear fact that I was not parked in a guest space. He said this was beyond harassment. It was interference with my property rights, and if Janet tried to tow my car, I should call the police immediately. He also said I should not move my car, because if I left and she claimed I had been blocking something, I would have no way to prove otherwise. He told me to sit tight, stay home for the tech, and let him handle Janet. At 10:15, Janet walked up my driveway. She did not knock. She stood at the end of the driveway near the street and shouted my name. I opened the door and stepped out onto the stoop. Marcus was still there, phone recording. Janet pointed at my car and said I was parked illegally and I had been warned. I said I was parked in my own driveway and asked her to show me the rule I was violating. She said I knew what I did, and I was creating a safety hazard by blocking the fire lane. I looked at the street. There was no fire lane. The street was a standard residential road with parking on both sides. Marcus stepped forward and said he was recording, and if she made any more false claims, he would file a complaint with the board and the county. Janet turned to him and said he was not involved and needed to leave. He said he was a witness and a resident and he had every right to be there. Her face went red, and she said we were both out of compliance and she was going to make sure we were held accountable. She left without another word, walking fast down the sidewalk toward the clubhouse. Marcus said I should expect retaliation and I should document everything. He sent me the video file and told me to back it up in 3 places. Then he left to get to work, and I went back inside to wait for the furnace tech. The tech arrived at 10:45, replaced the blower motor in 40 minutes, and had me sign the warranty paperwork. By noon, my heat was working again, and I thought maybe the worst was over. I was wrong. That afternoon, a mass email went out to the entire neighborhood from the Silver Creek board. The subject line was Safety Alert, and the body of the email said that due to repeated violations and disregard for community standards, the board was implementing immediate enforcement measures, including expedited towing for any vehicle parked in violation of guest parking or fire lane restrictions. The email did not name me, but it did not have to. Everyone knew. My phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors asking what was going on. I replied to a few, explaining that I had been parked in my own driveway and there was no fire lane, and I attached the photos. Most people were supportive, but a couple said I should just follow the rules and stop making trouble. One person said I was being selfish and putting everyone at risk of higher insurance rates. I forwarded the email to Marcus, and he replied within minutes. He said the email was defamatory because it implied I was creating a safety hazard when I was not, and he said the board had just opened themselves up to a lawsuit. He also said he had heard back from a friend who worked in county records, and there was no record of Silver Creek filing any lien paperwork against me, which meant Janet's threat had been a bluff. But the towing threat was real, because the HOA had a contract with a local tow company, and all Janet had to do was make a call. Marcus said I needed to be ready to escalate, and he suggested I file a formal complaint with the management company and the board, citing the records request violation and the harassment. I drafted the complaint that night. I kept it factual and professional, listing every notice, every email, every interaction, and attaching photos and timestamps. I cited Tennessee HOA law requiring disclosure of governing documents, and I pointed out that I had requested the CC and Rs over a month ago and still had not received them. I sent the complaint certified mail to the management company and every board member whose address I could find. I also sent a copy to the State Real Estate Commission, because Marcus said they had jurisdiction over HOA management companies. Then I waited. The response came 3 days later, and it was not what I expected. The management company sent a packet by overnight courier. Inside was a copy of the CC and Rs, a cover letter apologizing for the delay, and a bill for $75 for document processing and shipping. The letter said the fee was standard and required under the bylaws. I flipped through the CC&Rs looking for the fee schedule, and I found it buried on page 41 in a section labeled Administrative Costs. The fee schedule listed charges for copies, inspections, records requests, and variance applications, but the language was vague and gave the board discretion to set amounts. There was nothing about $75 for a single PDF and a priority mail envelope. I called Marcus and read him the section. He laughed and said they were gouging me, and the fee was not enforceable because Tennessee law required HOAs to provide documents at actual cost, not inflated processing fees. He told me to refuse to pay and to document the demand as evidence of the board hiding documents unless paid bogus fees. He also told me to read the CC and Rs carefully, because if Janet had been misquoting rules, I would find the proof in there. I spent the next 2 hours going through every page, highlighting anything related to parking, architectural review, or common property. I found the section on boot trays. It said exterior storage visible from the street required architectural approval, but it defined exterior as outside the building envelope, and my vestibule was inside. I found the section on snow removal. It said owners were responsible for their walkways, but it did not say anything about where to pile the snow. I found the section on parking. It said guest spaces were for guests only, but it did not define fire lanes, and it did not give the board authority to block private driveways. I took photos of every relevant page and sent them to Marcus. He replied, "You have everything you need. She has been making up rules. Now you just need the right moment to use it." I printed out a clean copy of the key sections and put them in my evidence folder. I also printed out the fee demand letter because that was the smoking gun Marcus had talked about. The board was conditioning document access on a bogus fee, which meant they were violating state law. I did not know when I would need to deploy it, but I knew the moment would come. The next week was quiet. Janet did not post in the group chat. No new notices appeared on my door. I thought maybe the complaint had worked, or maybe the management company had told her to back off. Then, on a Tuesday morning, I got a text from a neighbor I barely knew. It said, "Check the clubhouse parking lot. Someone put a sign on your car." I pulled on my coat and boots and walked over. There was no sign on my car, because my car was in my driveway. But there was a sign taped to the clubhouse bulletin board, and it had a photo of my car with my license plate visible and text below that said, "This vehicle has been reported for repeated violations. Owner has been notified. Towing enforced effective immediately." I took a photo of the sign with my phone, pulled it down, and walked back home. I called Marcus. He said this was a new low, and Janet was now publicly shaming me in a way that could be considered libel. He said I should file a police report for harassment, and I should also send a cease and desist letter to the board. He offered to draft it for me. I said yes, and he had it done by that afternoon. The letter demanded that the board remove any defamatory materials, stop all false violation notices, and provide the governing documents without fee as required by law. It also said that if the harassment continued, I would pursue legal action, including claims for defamation, interference with property rights, and violation of state HOA statutes. Marcus sent it certified mail to every board member and the management company. 2 days later, I got a call from the management company. A woman who identified herself as the community manager said she wanted to resolve the situation and asked if I would be willing to meet with her and Janet to discuss my concerns. I said I would meet with her but not with Janet unless there was a witness present. She said that was fine, and we set a time for Saturday morning at the clubhouse. I told Marcus, and he said he would come with me. I also told him I was ready to play my trump card if Janet tried anything, and he said, "Good. Make her dig her own grave first." Saturday morning was cold and clear. The clubhouse was a small brick building near the pool, with a parking lot that could fit maybe 10 cars. I parked in a guest space and waited for Marcus. He arrived a few minutes later, and we walked in together. The community manager was already there, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with a laptop and a stack of files. Janet was sitting across from her, arms crossed, mouth set in a thin line. The manager introduced herself as Linda and said she appreciated us coming. She said she wanted to hear both sides and find a path forward. Janet interrupted and said there was no both sides. I was a problem resident who refused to follow rules, and the board had every right to enforce compliance. Linda held up a hand and said, "Let him speak first." I pulled out my folder and laid it on the table. I started with the boot trays, showing the photos proving they were inside my vestibule and reading the section of the CC&Rs that defined exterior storage. Janet said the rule was clear, and I was twisting the language. I moved to the snow pile, showing the photos of every other driveway on the street with identical piles, and pointing out that the CC&Rs said nothing about where to place snow. Janet said I was creating a hazard, and I knew it. I moved to the parking cones and the towing threat, showing the photos of my car in my own driveway and reading the section on guest parking that did not mention fire lanes or give the board authority to block driveways. Janet said I was a liar and I had been warned multiple times. That was when I pulled out my phone and opened the saved email. I said, "You sent me an email on December 20th. You said I was the only problem on this street. You attached a blank lien notice as a threat. You CC'd the entire board. Do you remember that?" Janet's face went pale. Linda leaned forward and said, "Can I see that email?" I turned the phone toward her, and she read it, scrolling slowly. Then she looked at Janet and said, "Did you send this?" Janet said it was taken out of context. Linda said, "It looks pretty clear to me. You called him the only problem and threatened a lien without board approval." Janet said I had provoked her. Linda said, "That is not how this works." I pulled out the next document, the records request response with the $75 fee demand. I said, "I requested the CC&Rs on November 15th. It is now January 7th. They did not send them until I filed a formal complaint, and then they tried to charge me $75 for a document I am entitled to under state law." I read the statute number Marcus had given me, and I said, "This is conditioning access on a bogus fee, and it is illegal." Linda looked at the letter and said, "Who authorized this fee?" Janet said the board had discretion. Linda said, "Not for statutory disclosures." She made a note on her laptop and said, "This will be refunded." Then I said, "There is one more thing." I pulled out my phone again and opened the video Marcus had taken of Janet blocking my driveway with cones. I turned the volume up and hit play. Janet's voice came through the speaker, clear and angry, saying I was parked illegally and blocking a fire lane. The video showed my car in my driveway, the cones in the snow, and Marcus asking where the fire lane was. Janet on screen did not answer. I paused the video and said, "She placed those cones while I was waiting for a furnace repair appointment. If I had missed that appointment, my heat would have been out for a week in 15-degree weather. She tried to interfere with access to my own property, and she lied about a fire lane that does not exist. Do you want to see the photos of the sign she posted at the clubhouse with my license plate, accusing me of repeated violations I did not commit?" Linda closed her laptop and looked at Janet. She said, "I am going to recommend to the board that we retract the defamatory email and issue a correction to all homeowners. I am also going to recommend that we suspend all pending violations against this unit, pending a full review of enforcement procedures." Janet stood up and said, "You are letting him get away with this." Linda said, "I am following the law." Janet grabbed her clipboard and walked out, slamming the door behind her. Linda looked at me and said, "I am sorry this happened. We have had issues with selective enforcement before, and I will be addressing it with the board." She said the $75 fee would be voided, and she would send me a written confirmation by email that afternoon. She also said if I had any further issues, I should contact her directly and she would intervene. Marcus and I walked out together. He was grinning. He said, "You buried her," I said. "She buried herself. I just showed everyone the hole." We got in our cars and I drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That afternoon, Linda sent the email as promised. It confirmed the fee was voided, the violations were suspended, and the board would be reviewing Janet's role on the amenities committee. It also said a correction email would be sent to all homeowners by Monday. But I knew it was not over. Janet was not the kind of person who accepted defeat quietly. I spent the rest of the weekend waiting for the next move, checking my front door for notices, watching the group chat for posts. Nothing came. Monday morning, the correction email went out. It was short and bland, saying that previous communications regarding enforcement had contained inaccuracies, and the board regretted any confusion. It did not name me, and it did not name Janet. It was the kind of corporate non-apology that admitted nothing and changed nothing. But it was on the record, and that mattered. On Tuesday, Janet posted in the group chat. She said she was stepping down from the amenities committee effective immediately due to personal reasons. She thanked everyone for their support over the years and said she hoped the neighborhood would continue to uphold the high standards that made Silver Creek a great place to live. The post had a dozen replies within an hour, most of them thanking her for her service. Nobody mentioned me. Nobody mentioned the correction email. It was like the whole fight had never happened. I messaged Marcus and said, "Is it really over?" He replied, "For now. But watch your back. People like her do not just disappear." I knew he was right. I kept my evidence folder up to date, adding every new email, every photo, every timeline note. I kept checking the mail for new notices. I kept watching the group chat for posts. Weeks went by, and nothing happened. The snow started to melt. The days got longer. I started to relax. Then, in early February, I got a letter from a law firm I had never heard of. The letter said I was being sued by the Silver Creek Owners Association for unpaid fines totaling $850, plus legal fees and interest. The fines were itemized: $50 for the boot trays, $100 for the snow pile, $25 per day for 14 days of parking violations, and $75 for the records request fee. The letter said I had 30 days to pay in full, or the HOA would file a lien against my property and pursue collection. I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking. Then I called Marcus. He said, "They are bluffing. Those fines were never valid, and Linda suspended them. This is retaliation, and it is probably not even authorized by the board." He told me to respond in writing, citing the suspension email from Linda and demanding proof that the board had voted to pursue the lawsuit. He also told me to forward the letter to Linda and ask her to confirm that the fines had been dropped. I did both that night. Linda replied the next morning. Her email said she was shocked to hear about the lawsuit because the board had not authorized any legal action against me and the fines had been suspended pending review. She said she would contact the law firm immediately and demand an explanation. She also said she would be raising the issue at the next board meeting, which was scheduled for the following week. I felt a little better, but I knew the damage was done. The lawsuit threat was out there, and even if it was dropped, it would be hanging over me until the board officially voted to dismiss it. The board meeting was on a Thursday night at 7. It was open to all homeowners, and Marcus convinced me to attend. He said it was important to show up and make sure the board followed through. We arrived early and sat in the back row of the small clubhouse meeting room. There were maybe 15 people there, mostly board members and a few owners who always attended. Janet was not there. Linda was sitting at the front table with a stack of papers and a laptop. The board president, an older man named Tom who I had never met, called the meeting to order and started going through the agenda. The lawsuit was not on the agenda. I raised my hand during the public comment period and said I had received a letter from a law firm claiming the HOA was suing me for fines that had been suspended. I asked if the board had authorized the lawsuit. Tom looked confused. He said he had not heard anything about a lawsuit, and he asked Linda to explain. Linda pulled out a printed copy of the letter and read it aloud. Then she said she had contacted the law firm, and they claimed they had been retained by a board member acting on behalf of the HOA. She said the board member was Janet, and Janet had signed a retainer agreement without board approval. The room went silent. Tom said, "She does not have authority to do that." Linda said, "I know. That is why I am bringing it to your attention. The board needs to vote to disavow the lawsuit and demand that the law firm cease all action." Tom said, "So moved." Another board member seconded. The vote was unanimous. Linda said she would send a letter to the law firm that night, and she would also be recommending that the board consider removing Janet from all committees and possibly pursuing action against her for exceeding her authority. I thanked the board and sat down. Marcus leaned over and whispered, "You just won." I nodded, but I did not feel like I had won. I felt exhausted. The meeting ended 20 minutes later, and we walked out into the cold night. The parking lot was empty except for our cars and a few others. As I unlocked my door, I saw headlights pull in. It was Janet. She parked in a guest space and got out, walking fast toward the clubhouse. She saw me and stopped. For a second, I thought she was going to say something. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the building. I did not see her again after that. A week later, Linda sent an email to the neighborhood saying Janet had resigned from the board entirely and would no longer be involved in any HOA activities. The email thanked her for her years of service and wished her well. There was no mention of the lawsuit or the unauthorized retainer. The law firm sent me a letter saying they were withdrawing from the case and apologizing for any inconvenience. The fines were formally dismissed at the next board meeting. I got a refund check for the $75 document fee, and Linda personally apologized in a follow-up email. But the story did not end there, because Marcus had been digging. He had a friend who worked at the county clerk's office, and he asked her to pull records on Silver Creek. What she found was stunning. The management company had been filing late fee assessments against multiple homeowners for missed payments that were never actually late. They had been altering the date stamps on notices to make it look like owners had received warnings earlier than they actually had, then adding penalties when people did not respond to notices they had never gotten. The total amount collected in bogus late fees over the past 3 years was over $40,000, split between the management company and the HOA operating account. Janet had not been running the scheme, but she had been enforcing it, using her position to target anyone who pushed back. Marcus brought the evidence to the board, and the board brought it to a lawyer. Within a month, the management company was fired and the HOA hired a new one. The board voted to refund every late fee assessed over the past 3 years and to send a formal apology to every affected homeowner. They also voted to audit the financials and pursue legal action against the old management company for fraud. I got a refund check for $120 in late fees I did not even know I had been charged, buried in my monthly HOA dues as administrative costs. The neighborhood group chat exploded. People who had been silent during my fight with Janet suddenly came forward with their own stories. One woman said she had been fined $300 for a mailbox planter that was approved, but the approval paperwork had disappeared, and she had been forced to pay to avoid a lien. Another man said he had been charged late fees every month for a year because the management company claimed his checks were arriving after the due date, even though he had proof of mailing them a week early. A third neighbor said she had been threatened with towing for parking in her own driveway, the exact same thing Janet had done to me. Marcus organized a meeting at the clubhouse for anyone who wanted to share their experiences. Over 30 people showed up. We spent 2 hours going through stories, comparing notices, and building a timeline. It became clear that the management company had been running the scheme for years, and Janet had been their enforcer, using her role on the board to intimidate anyone who questioned the fees. The new management company launched an independent audit, and by spring they had recovered over $60,000 in fraudulent charges. Every homeowner who had been affected got a refund and a formal letter of apology from the board. Janet moved out in March. I heard from a neighbor that she bought a condo in a different part of town, somewhere without an HOA. I never spoke to her again. The new amenities chair was a retired teacher named Angela, who actually read the rules before enforcing them, and who responded to emails with helpful information instead of threats. The neighborhood group chat became a place for actual community discussion instead of a battlefield. I started to feel like I could breathe again. But I kept the evidence folder. I kept every notice, every email, every photo, every timeline entry. I kept the video of Janet blocking my driveway. I kept the lawyer's letter and the refund checks. I kept the printed pages of the CC&Rs with my highlights. I put it all in a binder and stored it in my closet, just in case. Because I learned something important during those months, the rules only protect you if you know what they say, and the people in power only back down when you have proof they cannot ignore. Spring came, and the snow melted. The neighborhood looked different in the sunlight, softer somehow, less hostile. I started saying hello to neighbors I had never talked to before. I helped Marcus organize a community cleanup day, and we filled 3 dumpsters with junk that had been piling up in the common areas for years. The new board passed a resolution limiting the amenities chair's enforcement authority and requiring all violation notices to be reviewed by the full board before being sent. They also passed a rule requiring the management company to provide monthly financial reports and to make all governing documents available online for free. I stayed in Silver Creek. I thought about moving, but I realized I did not want to run. This was my home, and I had fought for the right to live here without being harassed. I had won, not because I was louder or meaner than Janet, but because I had been willing to do the work. I read the rules. I documented everything. I found allies. I stayed calm when she tried to provoke me. And when the moment came, I used the truth she had tried to bury. One afternoon in April, I was sitting on my front stoop with a cup of coffee, enjoying the first warm day of the year. A car pulled up, and a young couple got out. They looked lost. I walked over and asked if I could help. They said they were thinking about buying a unit in Silver Creek and wanted to know what the neighborhood was like. I thought about lying, about telling them it was perfect and quiet and no trouble at all. But I did not. I told them the truth. I said it was a good neighborhood with good people, but it had an HOA, and HOAs could be tough if you did not know your rights. I told them to read the CC&Rs before they signed anything, to document everything in writing, and to never assume the board was acting in good faith just because they had authority. I told them about Janet, about the scheme, about the refunds. I told them it got better, but only because people fought back. They thanked me and said they would think about it. I watched them drive away, and I wondered if they would buy. I hoped they would. I hoped they would be the kind of owners who asked questions and pushed back when things did not make sense, because that was how neighborhoods got better. Not by staying quiet and hoping the problem would go away, but by standing up and demanding accountability. I finished my coffee and went back inside. My phone buzzed with a message from Marcus. He said the State Real Estate Commission had opened an investigation into the old management company based on the evidence we had provided, and there was a good chance they would lose their license. He said it was a long shot, but if it happened, it would send a message to every HOA management company in Tennessee that they could not get away with fraud. I replied, "Good. Let them sweat." That night, I pulled out the binder one more time. I flipped through the pages, looking at the photos and the notices and the emails. I thought about everything that had happened, all the stress and fear and anger. I thought about the moment I had stood in the clubhouse and played that video on speaker, watching Janet's face go pale as her lies fell apart. I thought about the corrections and the refunds and the apologies. I thought about the neighbors who had come forward and shared their stories. I thought about the new rules and the new management company and the new culture that was slowly taking hold. And then I thought about the trump card I had been holding, the records request response proving they had hidden documents unless paid bogus fees. I had teased it to Janet in that email, a small thank you for handing me leverage. I had not revealed the details immediately. I had waited, holding it back through the driveway blockade, through the public shaming, through the threats and the lies. And when the moment came, when I was sitting in that clubhouse with Linda and Janet and Marcus, I had deployed it exactly the way I had planned. I had played it on speaker outside the clubhouse so neighbors could hear it in real time, watching the board scramble to disavow Janet's lawsuit, watching the old management company crumble under scrutiny, watching the whole corrupt system collapse because one person had bothered to read the rules and demand accountability. I closed the binder and put it back in the closet. I did not need it anymore, but I was glad I had it. Because the fight was not really over. There would be new boards, new managers, new neighbors. There would be new rules and new violations, and new people who thought authority meant they could do whatever they wanted. But now Silver Creek had a history. It had a record of what happened when residents pushed back, when they demanded transparency, when they refused to be bullied. And that record would be there for the next person who got a bogus notice, the next person who found cones blocking their driveway, the next person who was told they were out of compliance and they knew it. I turned off the lights and went to bed. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet. No door hangers with snow-soaked edges, no angry emails, no threats. Just a normal spring night in a normal townhome complex in Knoxville, Tennessee. And for the first time since I had moved in, it felt like home. The weeks turned into months, and life in Silver Creek settled into a rhythm. The new management company was responsive and professional. The board started holding regular open meetings and actually listened to homeowner concerns. The neighborhood group chat became a place for organizing block parties and sharing recommendations for contractors instead of a war zone. I started to forget what it had felt like to wake up every morning wondering what new violation notice would be waiting for me. But I did not forget the lessons. I kept reading my mail carefully. I kept saving emails. I kept taking photos when something felt off. And when new neighbors moved in, I made a point of introducing myself and offering to answer questions about the HOA. I told them where to find the CC&Rs online, how to submit a records request, what their rights were. I told them about Janet, not to scare them, but to show them what could happen when one person decided the rules did not apply to them, and what could happen when the community decided to hold that person accountable. Marcus and I stayed friends. We met for coffee every few weeks and traded stories about work and life. He told me the state investigation into the old management company was moving forward, and it looked like they were going to face serious penalties. He also told me that 2 other HOAs in the area had fired the same company after hearing about what happened at Silver Creek, and that a local news station was considering doing a story on HOA fraud. He said I should be prepared to be interviewed if they reached out. I said I would think about it. One Saturday in May, I was mowing my tiny patch of front lawn when a woman I did not recognize walked up. She introduced herself as a reporter from the local paper and said she was writing a story about HOA accountability. She asked if I would be willing to talk about my experience with Silver Creek. I hesitated, then said yes. We sat on my front stoop and I told her the whole story. I showed her the binder, the notices, the emails, the photos. I explained how the management company had been running the fee scheme, how Janet had been the enforcer, how the board had finally stepped in and fixed it. She took notes and asked good questions. She said the story would run in 2 weeks, and she would send me a copy before it was published. The story came out on a Sunday. It was front page of the local section, with a headline that read, HOA fraud scheme uncovered in Knoxville neighborhood. The article detailed the management company's practices, the bogus fees, the refunds, and the board's response. It quoted me, Marcus, and 2 other homeowners. It named the management company and included a statement from their lawyer saying they denied any wrongdoing and were cooperating with the state investigation. It also included a sidebar with tips for homeowners on how to spot HOA fraud and what to do if they suspected their board was violating the law. The response was immediate. The newspaper's website comment section filled up with stories from people in other neighborhoods who had experienced similar problems. The State Real Estate Commission issued a press release saying they were expanding their investigation to include other complaints against the same management company. A local TV station picked up the story and ran a segment on the evening news. My phone started ringing with calls from neighbors thanking me for speaking out and from strangers asking for advice on their own HOA disputes. It was overwhelming, but it also felt good. I had not set out to be a crusader or a whistleblower. I had just wanted to live in my home without being harassed. But by standing up for myself, I had ended up helping a lot of other people. And that mattered. The management company lost their license 3 months later. The State Real Estate Commission found that they had systematically defrauded homeowners across multiple HOAs, and they imposed fines and banned the principals from operating in Tennessee. The old company declared bankruptcy, and most of the money they had collected was never recovered. But the board at Silver Creek had already issued refunds, and the publicity had forced other HOAs to do the same. It was not perfect justice, but it was something. Janet never came back. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had moved to Florida and bought a house in a community with no HOA. I hoped she had learned something from what happened, but I doubted it. People like her did not change. They just found new places to exert control. As for me, I stayed in Silver Creek. I renewed my lease, then eventually bought the unit when the owner decided to sell. I joined the board for a 1-year term and helped rewrite the enforcement policies to make them clearer and fairer. I organized a neighborhood potluck and got to know people I had only seen in passing. I planted flowers in my tiny front yard and put up a bird feeder, with proper architectural approval this time, just to be safe. And every time I walked past the clubhouse, I thought about that moment when I had stood in the parking lot and played the video on speaker, letting everyone hear Janet's lies fall apart in real time. I thought about the look on her face when the board voted to disavow her lawsuit. I thought about the refunds and the apologies and the new rules. I thought about how close I had come to just giving up and moving away, and how glad I was that I had not. Because in the end, the fight was not really about boot trays or snow piles or parking cones. It was about whether one person with a clipboard and a grudge could make my life miserable just because she felt like it. And the answer was no. Not if I knew my rights. Not if I had proof. Not if I was willing to stand up and say, "You are wrong, and here is why." That was the lesson I carried forward. That was the story I told new neighbors when they asked what Silver Creek was really like. It was a good place, I said, but you had to be ready to fight for it.